intro slide. So it's really good to see all of you here at BrainStation, and I'd like to thank Robin and Miles for having me. And so I heard that you all are coming up with ideas for your final capstone projects these 2 days. So I'm really excited to hear that. And that's why today I'm going to be talking about how to choose a data science project. And I can't wait to see what all of you come up with. So first of all, does this look familiar to you? And if you want to, you can, raise your hand or raise your hand in your mind. As someone who's done a lot of self-learning and side projects myself, there are many ideas that kind of, I guess, die in what I call a Jupyter notebook graveyard, not to be morbid here. So I grabbed the screenshot actually from my computer, like just a couple days ago, like my own Jupyter folder. And I have plenty of ideas that actually didn't make it to even be renamed from like untitled to idea 1 or idea 2. So I'm going to share with you today how to make your capstone a full-fleshed idea and not end up like this. So I'm going to show you another thing that I grabbed from my browser. So if you can see the kind of animation on the right side, it's a folder on my Chrome I made when I was trying to figure out a data science project last year. I was also in the same spot as you all were, right? Trying to research topic and stuff. And the title of the folder is just side project, like Python side project, if you can see it. So many bookmarks and so many ideas, they're all on different topics. And honestly, the time it takes to read all of these saved articles is probably more than what it takes to actually just build something. So I'll talk about how to narrow down all these ideas as well, even if they're all exciting, which I'm sure they are, right? But it's kind of this narrowing down that is a challenge sometimes. Okay, so let's get started. During your program, you probably got inspired on many, many things that you can accomplish with the data science skills that you learned and many other skills that you learned. So now that you get the chance to showcase it all in your capstone, there's probably a lot of ideas floating around, and there's a lot you're thinking you can do with these skills that you learned. And it's easy to get stuck and frustrated trying to narrow down. And I want you to be able to recognize when you're stuck doing too much research or too much editing your ideas, which are really, for me, the 2 most common reasons that projects get stuck or end up in my Jupyter notebook graveyard. So we know that the capstone has a timeline, right? It does have a deadline. So we want to avoid that frustration of getting stuck for too long, right? Because that'll really eat up into the time that you're making progress within that timeline. So I want to share how to define a topic given time constraints especially, and make sure that you're getting the most out of the project and learning what you want to be learning it, so to speak. So I'm going to give a quick overview on the many times I've had to pick projects and topics, and I've learned a lot of what I shared today pretty much the hard way. So I was in undergrad, and I did my undergrad thesis on video game pricing. So choosing that topic wasn't the easiest, but it was probably the easiest out of everything that I've done on this timeline. I started developing a video game at the end of undergrad, and I was actually working on it on and off during my master's, and I completed it while I was working full-time. Well, that's my current role as a data scientist at Bell. And it's actually on Steam, and it's going to come to consoles as well. So I guess I spent a lot of time on this as well, like a side project of sorts. And picking the topic and the type of game was also one of the ways that I learned, it's really easy to get bogged down by too many brilliant ideas. And during my master's, so I did my master's in economics actually at the University of Toronto. So I had 2 research papers, which I had to come up with topics for myself, just by myself. No prof was giving me the ideas. And I did one on video game pricing again by scraping web data with Python. And the other one I did on Reddit engagement. And I also did that with web scraping data with Python. So these two projects actually became the catalyst to how I entered data science, right? Because it's data scraping and data processing and, you know, working with data with Python. So that kind of became how I fell into the industry. So maybe we're seeing a trend here actually with the video game related data projects, right? Because I mentioned I did that in my undergrad and I did that in my master's. So it's really what interested me and what I wanted to learn, which helped me decide on projects out of everything, which are unique. And it's not really someone else's idea of what could be employable. That's not necessarily the case. Because I work at Bell, right? I work in telecom. And the projects that I'm working on right now at Bell. So I do reinforcement learning, I do recommender systems, which are two really big fields in machine learning. And I do that at work right now, but it has nothing to do with video games, I guess, in my like real full-time work, right? So the side projects you do might not necessarily have to do with what, you know, like employability is, but it really, really depends. Like maybe you really want to enter telecom or some other industry. So it would help if you chose that. But I'm just saying that it might not necessarily be the case. So through all of these, I guess, experiences and stuff, I figured out that simply being honest with what you're interested in is the best way to really pick a topic. So I've boiled this down into 3 main points to help you define and complete a data science project. And the first key is to build a skill set wish list. So this has something to do with what I mentioned before on being honest on what your interests are, right? So I mentioned that I use video games as a topic, and actually it was a bit embarrassing for me to admit that at first, right? Because a lot of my master's classmates, they were doing like serious topics, like they were doing housing data, or they're doing like really employable things like working with financial data, like time series and stuff. So I did figure out early on that if I had chosen topics like that because they were doing it, I would have been really bored. And I would have been so bored, I wouldn't have bothered learning using Python to do web scraping, which is really what built my skills to become a data scientist. Like not necessarily the web scraping part, but using a lot of Python. So I guess here I want you to really, really think about it. Like what are topics you are interested in? And these topics that would help you be motivated to kind of go above and beyond and learn, or all of the skills that you learned in this program so far, right? Like what might be your favorite one to showcase? And I do mention on the slides that there are some other reasons. That could be you're improving your portfolio, which I assume that the project will be used for, like a portfolio for a job search. So, right, you want to be showcasing really what makes you unique and what you're really interested in. And because you're all doing the same program, right? You know, even though you're all doing the same program, rather, the answer to this will actually be really, really different for all of you, right? Even if you took the same courses, even if you did similar assignments, like what really interests each and every one of you is going to be different. And it's going to be really useful for your topic if you can just be honest with yourself and see what's your favorite. It doesn't have to be what your peers' favorites are. It could be, but you know, the way that I kind of decided my topics were really what interests me, and that will help me do more, in fact, in the end. So you don't have to tell anyone. You know, like I said, I think the video game thing is kind of embarrassing, and I didn't tell anyone at first, right? So I want you to think about this reason and kind of write it down. So if you can see at the bottom of the slide, I'm just gonna refer to this thing over and over again in this talk. And you can keep coming back to this reason, which can actually help you define the kind of skills and the kind of technologies that you'll be doing in your side project, well, your capstone project. So just substitute this with whatever you think is the most important to you, right? When I mention this afterwards in the talk. So now that you hopefully have thought about your reason, or if you can't come up with something so quickly, you can take some time to mull it over later, or in these 2 days when you're doing your brainstorming. So for example, right, for me, right, my real reason was I just didn't want to work with data that's boring. Like I thought the typical data that like economics assignments were so boring, to be honest. And that was just this embarrassing reason to me that actually helped me to figure out what is not boring to me and which is something that I like, and how to help me create projects that help me get into the data science field. So now that I'm in the field, right, I do realize that there's a lot more dimensions that you could think about. And that's one thing I like about being in the data science field, right? It's because there's so many ways for data scientists or people in this field to make a difference that it really differs for each person, right? Like, do you want to impact a lot of users, or do you want to improve accuracy, or do you want to predict the future? You know, it's actually impossible for one data scientist to really do all of these, and the list goes on and on. So if you can kind of figure out which one is important to you, it'll actually help you in your project kind of figure out which ways to go about it and target that. So which one out of these is most important to you? I would like you to think about that as well. So now that I've kind of gone through those things, like your reasons for doing the project, and you know what it kind of is important for you in showcasing your data science skills, you can start to make a kind of skill set wish list. So what does this mean, right? This, for me at the time, my reason was to work with data that's not boring. So I needed to get data straight from the source and to get power to get to those data sources. So that helped me decide, okay, I need to learn to use web scraping libraries in Python, right? So this kind of helps you really define things in a kind of stepwise fashion, and it's kind of straightforward, right? There's no, it's not confusing that, oh, why do I need to learn web scraping? Or why do I need to learn like X technology, right? It's more about what you want to do with it as well. And then later on, I was doing this other side project that was learning about deep fakes, actually. So it's like using neural networks to generate fake images, right? And because I had focused on that kind of theme and that reason, it allowed me to focus on skills that are required instead of, you know, getting distracted by a lot of machine learning topics they're like shiny toys, really, like NLP, reinforcement learning, or CNNs and stuff. Like, there's so many shiny things out there, and I want to learn them all. But because I had settled on my theme and my reason, I knew I couldn't get distracted by those, right? So there's a lot of information online and unnecessary things that could mess up your plan of what you want to do. And as long as you have your kind of reason set solid, then it's going to be less likely that you'll get distracted by them. So I knew at the time I didn't need to like read all of those bookmarks that I had in my Chrome browser on stuff like NLP. Like, those are interesting too, right? But I didn't, for the scope of my project, I didn't want to get distracted by them. Yeah, and sometimes you might need to gather more information as well. So I find it pretty important to talk to people in the industry and see what they're doing, or maybe people that you think are working on something cool. Because sometimes we are limited by our own knowledge. So, you know, maybe they'll suggest a tech stack, or, you know, something like language that you hadn't heard of, and you can then consider putting those on your skill set wish list as well. Right. So I guess overall, I really invite you to give these things a thought. What is kind of your main reason for this project and your main kind of theme? And then from that reason, what are the skills that you want to do to accomplish that, right? It could be out of anything that you have learned in this program so far. And if so, like, what are your favorites, right? What do you think that you really want to showcase that would create a meaningful project for you? And that would really help you narrow down topics and technologies that you work with. So the second point to kind of define and complete a data science project is recognize when you're experiencing information paralysis or decision paralysis, which is when there's so much information and so many ideas that makes it hard to progress. Right. So when I was coming up with ideas in my projects or in video game development, there were times that I felt that I couldn't and I shouldn't get started yet. I just need to do a little bit more research. I just don't have that like 100% idea yet. Right. The inspiration hasn't struck. And I would just like stall and I would gather a lot of things in this folder, like this Chrome browser bookmarks folder, to trick myself that I was making progress towards that like once in a lifetime idea, right? But the truth is this was just decreasing my motivation and preventing me from doing anything at all. So all this information is great, but it's like the shiny things that I've mentioned before. Like you have to really control this flow of information, or there might be too many things that end up in your ideas. Right. And I guess for this case, since these are projects that are done for maybe schools or, capstone with a deadline, so that already really takes care of this main point that I was going to bring up. So I still suggest keeping this in mind, right? Because I'm sure that you also have a deadline of submitting your topic and finalizing it. So you're not kind of like going in circles like with a self-paced project. Like I could really drop off that project at any point that I wanted to without a deadline, without any like penalty. But once you have the topic down, right, there might be still kind of this urge to keep doing research and becoming over prepared before you really get started. So I do suggest that once you have a topic, you kind of get your hands dirty with code and get your hands dirty with data sooner than later so that you can have time to iterate and improve your capstone. Yeah, but the fact that you have deadlines is already a pretty good thing, actually, for that point, for information paralysis. And actually, the last part is kind of a tip to help like pace and scope the project as well, since it's going to be something that you have a little bit of freedom in. And, there is a lot of things that I guess in my experience have gone wrong. So I'm just telling you all these things so that you won't need to do that and make those mistakes and spend a lot of extra time. So here I'm going to use one of my own side projects as an example. And since it was self-paced, right, there was a bit less, I guess, stakes like graduating like for you all. I could back out at any time, right? So there was often frustrations with motivation and frustrations on maybe having too many items on my skill set wish list. And I was having trouble like time boxing myself, right? But thankfully you don't have that. And I guess I bring up the too many items that I wanted to cram into the project because it would actually cause burnout as well, right? I would keep working on it, and then actually would make me more exhausted rather than wanting to complete this data science project. So this is one that I kind of mentioned a bit earlier, learning about deepfakes. So here I had my skill set wish list, and which was, what is needed to learn about deepfakes, right? Which are maybe, it could be technologies like how do I implement deepfakes or other things like that, like how do I scrape data to, generate a deepfake image. So that was the reason, and then my own skill set wish list that came from the reason, right? And when I got stuck, after I did this exercise to kind of narrow all these things back down again, I was able to focus a bit more. And then this is where something that I figured out was pretty important is also I needed to figure out how I want the project to end, right? And kind of reverse engineer that. So I would say the reason and the skill set wish lists are like your starting points. And then you also kind of want an end point so that you can figure out what kind of goes in between what you want and kind of the middle things, right? So so the last point on the slide here is defining what a deliverable looks like. And it's kind of vague, right? Like if I'm just saying, oh, I want to learn about deepfakes, like at what point can I say that I really understand deepfakes? So I wanted to define, okay, I want to be able to train a functional GAN network that visually converges, or maybe I can output GIFs of the training process, or maybe I could try to put it into an interactive application, which I eventually scrapped. But just defining these points helped me figure out a project endpoint that I want to get to instead of keeping adding things, and just getting burned out, right? So this is kind of the various stages, right? So this is like training it and then outputting like a GIF of like a fake image. Like this is not in the training data at all. So it kind of figured out what makes this person, well, it's Ariana Grande, right? And then create a fake image of it. So I wouldn't have gone to this point if I didn't really kind of think about what am I trying to do here, right? Otherwise, I would keep doing all these things here I mentioned, right? Maybe I'll try to output high-res things, and I even bought a domain just like impulsively. I was like, I'm gonna make this interactive like GAN website on app. But then I thought I was getting a bit tired out at the point in this project. And then I thought about in gaming, we often have this kind of scope thing. So oftentimes, like especially small studios, you will have maybe a scope 1, which is a playable, shippable product. And then you'll have a scope 2, which is only going to happen with a bit more features if you get more funding. And maybe you'll have a scope 3 when you have more funding and more time, right? So the first scope is actually something that is complete by itself, but it's not like all the things that you want to add. So here I just had, okay, I'm going to output like low res images. And in terms of the Ariana Grande project about GANs, so these were my scopes eventually. And actually, the truth is I didn't even complete the latter 2 scopes because as you could see from the images I showed earlier, I only output low-res images, right? I didn't do the kind of website idea, but I still have a complete side project that I can show, right? So I guess in terms of the capstone, it's like there's probably a lot of things that you want to add, and then it would be nice to put them in a tiered, like, okay, this is going to be my MVP, my minimal viable product. And then these are my scope 2 and my scope 3. So the best part of this process and why I really swear by this method is that even if you start partway, it's not really failing at all, right? And the project is not going to end up in this kind of Jupyter Notebook graveyard because of this. So in other words, with this method, you can define several stopping points when you plan out your data science projects so that you can have some flexibility, but also have a complete project regardless of which scope that you're hitting. Yeah, so I hope that these 3 points, these 3 key items can help you define your project. And the first one is building a skill set wish list of what kind of skills you want to showcase that are important to you, and define your reasons for this side projects. Like of course, like it could be related to the industry that you're hoping to join or what kind of sub-industry, or it could be about some interests that are completely personal to you, right? Because either way, you want to demonstrate your kind of unique skill sets. It doesn't have to be what everyone else is doing, but something that's just important to you. And the second one is have a kind of cap on your research time and rather get started sooner than later, getting your hands dirty with your concept and your code and your data, and then iterate a bit later so that you don't spend most of your time between now and the capstone deadline doing more research and being over-prepared. And the third one is to scope your project in kind of these milestones or modules and have these tiered endpoints so that even if you are hitting one of the scopes or 2 of the scopes, you'll still have a pretty complete project, and it won't, it'll lessen like the frustrations about trying to do everything all at once, right? Like, of course we want that, but it's just kind of a thing that I learned from doing so many projects. Yeah, so that is the end of this, but I just want to show this to you, like this tweet that really resonated with me, which is the hardest thing about being a passionate developer is knowing which side project to focus on, right? And since you do have a deadline, which I assume you have a deadline for this, you don't want to be, you want to be passionate, but then you also want to know which side project to focus on, which idea to focus on. So yeah, that is the end. So I hope you will think about kind of your skill set wish list and your reasons. And I do have some additional resources. I did write about some of this, some of the content that I've talked about today, as well as some totally unrelated content, which is about interview preparation. And another senior data scientist who's a good friend of mine has written a terrific article as well about getting a job as a data scientist. So I thought that would be useful to learn, because she talks a little bit about projects as well. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and thanks for having me.